Okay, my name is Lawrence McGlynn, and you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 FM in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Blue Sky at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Executive Director of the Preservation Alliance of Greater Philadelphia, Paul Steinke, to discuss the school district's facilities plan. And Lance Haber will provide an update on SNAP benefits. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's a big show, a lot going on. So we're going to jump right into our interview with Paul Steinke from the Philadelphia Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia. All right, we are here with Mr. Paul Steinke. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Before we get into the schools a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about the Preservation Alliance of Greater Philadelphia and what kind of work you do?
Sure. The Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia is a nonprofit, member-supported organization that works to promote the preservation and reuse of Philadelphia's older buildings. We've been around since 1979, and we work to help property owners find solutions for their vacant buildings, to prevent vacancy, to honor buildings on the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places, and to generally show people how preservation can really help themselves, help their neighborhoods, and help the city.
So the school district recently released a plan to close and or modify several schools across the city. It's changed a little bit since it was first announced. But what was your initial reaction to that plan?
Well, we have been anticipating the school district's facilities master plan for some time. They indicated a while back that they were undertaking this study. And so we tried to prepare ourselves and prepare the city for that report coming out from the standpoint of their existing facilities. And they have over 200 properties, some of which go back to the 1800s. And so they've got a considerable number of what we would call historic buildings, certainly old buildings. And so when the plan came out, we felt like we were ready to really evaluate it from the standpoint of the priorities that we tried to identify in the report that we did last summer of 2025.
So one of the things that keeps coming up for me and was mentioned in the report, was mentioned in your testimony from the hearing about this, is the financial difference between demolishing a building and rehabbing it. And I know that there's probably every situation is unique, but generally speaking, when we talk about how these buildings are used and what they can be used for, what do you think makes the most sense?
I think it's a matter of how the school district frames the issue. Framing it as, oh, we've got a lot of buildings that are neglected, run down, and need a lot of investment, and therefore we should get rid of the buildings, is the wrong approach. The right approach is to see these buildings as the community assets that they are, the physical assets that they are, to see them as examples of architecture, design, and construction that cannot be duplicated today, and to see them as assets worth preserving, whether by the school district themselves as continuation as public schools, or as community assets that can be repurposed for other uses that serve their neighborhoods. If you take that as a starting point, then I think you're going to wind up with a situation where the school district is not proposing wholesale demolition and new construction of schools. And in fact, that's where we are. They are not proposing wholesale demolition of dozens of schools and new construction. They do seem to be framing this as, how do we make the best use of the assets that we have in meeting their mission, which is to serve children and families in Philadelphia.
And on that note, the report that you had mentioned that the Alliance released in August, it had specific policy recommendations, items like conducting a comprehensive inventory of historically significant school properties, establishing preservation partnerships, things like that. Do you think, or do you know if items like that have been addressed by the school district in this plan?
I think what the school district has put out so far is a high-level view of the future of their historic building inventory. They haven't really revealed much in the way of the detail of the analysis that they've taken for me to really be able to comment on that authoritatively. I think the report that we did provided them with some of the information that we think they could find useful in making these evaluations, including which properties are listed on the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places, which properties are listed on the National Register of Historic Places, both of which are important data points in considering what to do with these buildings going forward.
And just for people who don't know, what are the benefits or the process for which a building is put on the local register or National Register of Historic Places?
So a property can be listed on the local or national register through a nomination that is submitted to the historic preservation body, either at the city or at the state level. It's the state level that's the first line of communication for national register designation. So in each case, there are clear guidelines spelled out as to how a nomination should be structured and what arguments it needs to make in order to demonstrate that a building qualifies for historic listing. Once a building is confirmed for historic listing, the impact is different between local listing, which is called the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places, that's been around since 1955, and the National Register of Historic Places, which has been around since 1966. In the case of a local designation, it means that a building cannot be demolished without the city's consent, and that is through the Philadelphia Historical Commission. So it does provide a measure of protection against demolition for historic buildings. It also can provide some zoning advantages for redevelopment. Some of them are pretty recently enacted by the city as ways to encourage historic preservation. And I'm not only just talking about schools, I'm talking about any building that's listed on the register. When it comes to the National Register of Historic Places, that's administered by the National Park Service, which is a unit of the federal government. The State Preservation Office does have a role. Every state has a state preservation office that gets involved in this process. But what that listing does and does not do, I'll start with what it does do. It makes available potentially the federal historic tax credit, which is a federal income tax credit for rehabilitation of National Register listed buildings under certain terms and conditions. It's not automatic. You have to go through an approval process and meet certain requirements. But that is a powerful incentive for the rehabilitation of historic buildings to get it's really a 20% tax credit based on the investment you're making in the project. What it does not do, and again, this is national listing, National Register, it does not provide protections for listed buildings. The federal government does not get in the way of demolition or renovations. Only the local designation does that. And the reason for that is because it's the local government that issues building permits, and that's where local designation comes into play.
So this situation is still kind of fluid, but right now, what would you, from your perspective, like to see happen with these buildings? And what would be a good course forward for the school district?
Well, for starters, we were relieved when the plan first came out when it became clear that they were not calling for widespread demolition. There have been a handful over the last few years that worried us. There was the James Martin School up in Port Richmond, and there was another one in the Winfield section, I'm blanking on the name of that school, where the historic school building or structure was demolished and a new building was put up. And we do hear a lot of call for that to happen more in a more widespread fashion. You sometimes hear parents and families say that. And you can understand why they would say that because of how far some of these buildings have been allowed to deteriorate, allowed to decline. So when the report came out, we were relieved to see that that's not what the school district's number one priority seems to be. In fact, what they seem to have identified is a priority to renovate where possible for continued use as schools. And we think that's great because, as I said at the beginning, a lot of these buildings were built with materials and a quality of construction that cannot be replicated today. And a lot of these buildings are landmarks, historic landmarks and institutions in the communities that they serve, where generations of families have lived and gone to school there. And so there are many cases where alumni associations don't want to see their historic school building lost. They want to see it invested in and made first class again, the way it was when it first opened, whether it was in 1890, 1930, or 1960. So it looks like the school district is, broadly speaking, it looks like that's the way they're thinking too. Let's make use of these historic schools as schools in as many cases as we can. There are some exceptions that they have identified. I think the number is now 18 schools that they're looking to close. For starters, that's a pretty small percentage of their overall school inventory. I think it's 10%, something like that. So it's a relief to us that they're not looking to do a wholesale demolition and reconstruction of the school district's school buildings. And so I guess to answer your question more succinctly, we would prefer to see as many of these school buildings as possible invested in, brought up to a good standard, and continued in use to serve the children and families of Philadelphia.
All right, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, Denise.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Steinke. Thank you for joining us.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Um, I guess my question, or my first question, concerns the upkeep of these buildings. As you said, a lot of them are buildings where they were made in a way that they're not made anymore. Is that part of the reason why some of them end up in disrepair, because it may cost a little more to keep them up because of how they were constructed?
I think the answer really is no, that these buildings, many of them, were built so well that if they had received a minimum standard of maintenance over the years, they would still be in good operating condition. But any building, if you don't maintain them properly, whether it's your home or your school or your church or an apartment building, if they don't get reasonable investment of maintenance dollars over their lifetime, they're going to start falling apart. And in fact, newer buildings built today are almost designed to fall apart more quickly. They're almost like disposable buildings. They're made with cheaper materials, lesser quality construction to save money up front, but in the long run, they become costly because they don't last as long. So I think the quality of construction of these buildings means that if they're reinvested in many cases, they can be brought back up to first-class condition for less investment than new buildings cost. In fact, we did an analysis of 7 historic schools that showed about $50 million in savings by repairing them instead of replacing them. And a good example of that is Frankfurt High School, which closed for repairs a couple of years ago. And initially there was talk of tearing it down and building a new Frankfurt. But in the end, the school district made what we think is the right decision. They reinvested in the buildings, reopened Frankfurt in the fall, and to great reviews. Everybody is pleased. The building retains its historic grandeur and its place in its community, but is once again a first-class educational building.
Now, from what you know of the schools earmarked for closure, are any of them on either the city's registry of historic places or the national registry?
I don't have the list in front of me. The answer is yes. I cannot cite school by school, but yes, some of them do have national register listing, and one has local listing.
Now, from what I understand about the historic places, I've covered things that the Preservation Society has been involved in, like when Mother Bethel got their windows broken, you all were involved in fixing that. Um, from what I understand, if a building has been designated as a member of the National Registry of Historic Places, there are only certain things that can be done to that building without the permission of the folks who that it's on the registry of. Can you talk a little bit about what those things are and whether or not, and what they include and what they don't include?
Right. So in fact, it really is local listing that brings in restrictions on what can be done to a historic building. And generally, the restrictions only apply to exterior alterations or changes. So if a building is listed on the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places, let's say it's a school building, and if the school district wanted to demolish that school, they would have to get the permission of the Philadelphia Historical Commission. Or if the school district wanted to build an addition onto that school, they would have to go through the Philadelphia Historical Commission to make sure that the addition did not detract from the features that make that school worthy of local designation. National Register designation, which applies to far more of the school buildings that the school district owns, does not imply any control over what happens to the buildings. The school district can do whatever they want. They still have to get building permits from the city to do it, but they don't have to go through the Philadelphia Historical Commission for those national register buildings.
So if the school district wanted to knock down a building on the national registry, the threshold to do that would be lower than
Correct.
if they wanted to do something on the city registry.
That's correct, yes.
So since the city registry has the higher threshold in terms of what you can do with that building once it's on, what is the process for getting the building on the city registry?
Well, first of all, a relative few school buildings are on the local register of historic places. But the process is the same as it is for any other building. A nomination demonstrating that the building or the school deserves to be listed has to be produced. Anyone can do that, from private citizens to organizations like the Preservation Alliance, and sometimes even city employees through the Philadelphia Historical Commission themselves do it. And the nomination has to meet certain criteria to demonstrate why a building deserves to be listed. And then the Philadelphia Historical Commission considers that nomination through a series of public hearings. And if they decide that the nomination meets the criteria, then the building gets listed. And that is true, as I said, for any building that's listed. You can even nominate historic objects. For example, the Wanamaker Eagle inside the Wanamaker building is listed as a historic object on the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places. So it doesn't even have to be a building, although in most cases it is a building.
Okay. And if folks wanted to know more about the process of getting something declared historical under the city's historical landmarks or objects thing, would they be able to go to your website and get that information?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the Preservation Alliance has a recently updated guide to how to nominate properties for the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places. It is on our website, and it's a step-by-step guide of the different sections that need to be completed and what the process is to get the nomination considered by the Philadelphia Historical Commission. So yes, we do have that.
Okay, one last question that doesn't have anything to do with schools, but does have something to do with a house that I've kind of, been interested in knowing what the status of it is. The John Coltrane house.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any new information on the status of that building?
Yes, as of last fall, restoration work on the exterior began under the auspices of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the family of John Coltrane. The Coltrane family regained ownership of the property a couple of years ago and has raised some funds, including from the National Trust and also, I believe, from the Mellon Foundation and maybe others to start work on restoring the exterior of the property. And they are putting together a plan to restore the interior as the next phase, as part of opening the house for visitation and historical interpretation. So the Coltrane House is on a very good track now, whereas it was not for about a decade prior to last fall. So that's good news.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that, especially.
You're
But thank you
welcome.
so much for giving us some of your time today. And you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. Before we let you go, I had the idea as you and Denise were talking, at some point, we should do maybe a hall monitor special where we look at some of these buildings and some of these objects. I think that would be fascinating. It is for me because I think this is interesting. And I got to ask you something. And I think I know the answer, but why are buildings made so poorly now? Is it all?
So I think the term poorly is not one that I would readily agree with. I would say that the buildings are made safely, that most new buildings are made safely, that we've got good systems in place to ensure that the construction is sound, that the materials are sound. I think what we've lost is a sense of good design, especially for institutional buildings like schools. Budget is so much a part of and dominates what the priorities of organizations that build these buildings, that they're looking for the least expensive way to build a safe and functional building. And so what we get is just that, a building that's safe and functional, but doesn't inspire. It doesn't make your heart sing when you walk up to it, when you walk through the door, and when you get inside. It may get the job done, but it's not something that is memorable. And in past generations, the economics were probably different, and the skill sets of the people involved were different, and the priorities were different. And so design was much more a part of what was considered a good project than it is today. I think that's the difference.
And as we have this conversation, I'm sitting in the caucus room of Philadelphia City Hall, which is one of these beautiful grand rooms in a beautiful building. But I'd also like to make the case that Art Deco should be brought back because that is the zenith of design, in my opinion.
Well, I love Art Deco too. And in fact, so many of our schools were built in the Art Deco style in the 30s and 40s, all over the city. You know, one of them that is in the news a lot, it's no longer a school, is Bach. That's an Art Deco school. And there are numerous other examples all over the city of that design. And it really is a wonderful era of architectural design. And we're never going to build buildings like that again. That's why it's so important to save the ones we've got, keep them as schools if it makes sense. And there are a lot of factors that have nothing to do with architecture and design that go into that decision making. And then when they go out of use as schools, like Bach, let's do our best to make sure they find productive uses that continue to serve the communities that they're in.
Okay. So how can people learn more about the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia?
I would recommend that they visit our website, www.preservationalliance.com, and visit some of the tabs. You'll find information on tours and lectures that we offer. You'll find resources about Philadelphia's historic buildings, streetscapes, and neighborhoods. You'll find information on how to participate in the process of preservation and how to become active as a citizen. So there's a rich vein of information available to anybody who logs on to our website. Once again, preservationalliance.com.
All right, Mr. Paul Steinke, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right, we'd like to thank Mr. Paul Steinke for being with us on the program. And now we'd like to bring on Lance Haver to tell us a little bit about what's going on with SNAP benefits across the state here.
Well, that was a great interview. That was really fascinating. A little on the depressing side that we don't recognize the role of architecture in inspiring our students. I mean, going to a school that uplifts you, that says you're important, that says education's important, that society cares about you, your parents care about you. They're putting you in this spectacular building because you matter, somehow is lost. And now we're just putting kids in, for lack of a better term, something that could be a jail, could be a school, you know, either one. It's not inspiring. I mean, you know, I know that I went to college at a very different time, but, you know, going to a library that had meaning, that had serious, where people were inspired to have serious thoughts, was really meaningful, as opposed to going to a box where there was nothing there that was telling you how important you were. So I really thought that Mr. Paul's message was great. I really appreciated hearing from it. And I do hope, Larry, that you follow through with him and get some of those buildings on the screen so other people can see them.
Yep, absolutely.
Talking about depressing things, though, I'm talking about SNAP. So for some of us, SNAP isn't clear. It is the food stamp program that's been renamed SNAP because we no longer have food stamps. People get cards, and because whatever it is that we do, we like to hire consultants and give them a lot of money, and they came up with the Supplemental Nutrition Action Plan, SNAP. Why we think that's better than food stamps, I'm not sure, but that's an old decision. The most current decision, as we're going to hear, is for the Republican leadership in the State House in the United States Congress and President Trump to say we have to cut SNAP benefits and Medicare benefits to pay for the tax cuts where the top 0.1% will get all the benefits. And while they talk about it as if saying, well, you know, we're gonna cut waste and fraud because, of course, who's in favor of waste and fraud? But almost in every other example, somebody does a survey, somebody does a study, somebody does something that says, well, here's the level of waste and fraud that we expect. So you take, let's say, 1,000 SNAP recipients and you do a study and you find out that, well, wait a minute, there's 1% of them that's actually engaged in fraud or something. And so you say, well, we could save 1%. In this case, what they've done is just the opposite. They created the belief that 20% of every SNAP dollar is wasted, so they have to cut 20% of the recipients. But there's no correlation, there's no study, there's nothing that suggests, even for a argument, that there's 20% waste in the program. In fact, SNAP is one of the most efficient programs, and I'm not saying there isn't waste. I don't think that we should ever say that. I don't think that we should ever say it can't be better. I think what we can say is the first thing to do is to continually to improve, and then take the savings that we create and use it for something else, not to arbitrarily say there's 20% fraud. So 1 out of 5 people is going to be eliminated from SNAP. But here's the thing. The way they're going to eliminate them is by making people jump through hoops, knowing the following things. 1, people who are struggling economically tend to move more often and don't get their mail. We know that. 2, we know that it's hard for people to read bureaucratic letters. And the letter that people are currently getting states in the opening sentence, you get SNAP benefits. And then you have to keep reading to find out, but they're going to end. And then there's a 4 or 5 point test that you have to go through to figure out whether you should be getting them or not, and what you have to do to qualify. And while many of us want to blame the Trump administration and blame the Republicans in Washington, D.C., that letter comes from the state of Pennsylvania. It doesn't come from President Trump. It comes from the Department of Human Services in Pennsylvania. They're the ones who wrote that letter. Be nice to be able to blame someone we don't like, but we can't. It's not true. And the final thing is, we know that people who are struggling don't necessarily jump through the hoops well. And again, just to be very straightforward, we know that the earned income tax credit, which is money sent to you by the federal government if you're working and you have a family, all you have to do is fill out one form. We know that roughly 30% of the people who are eligible don't apply. We know for the homestead exemption, which is worth $1,400, people can save $1,400 on their real estate taxes. You don't even have to fill out a form and mail it in. You can go online and do it. And we know that 33% of homeowners don't take advantage of it. We know that people don't get LAHI. We know that people don't get SNAP. We know that people, because of their lives, because of the difficulty, because of everything else, we know that people can't jump through all the hoops. And so that is what the federal government is counting on. I went to a press conference, and again, we should disclose this fully, the Philadelphia Unemployment Project press conference. I'm on the board, and we're also sponsors of what we're going to hear about, which is an attempt to find a different way of telling people what's going on. And to put it in perspective, I moved to Philadelphia in 1978. There were 5 daily newspapers and the Tribune. No Sun at that point, but 5 daily newspapers. There's now, there's now only 1 daily newspaper. There were 4 talk stations, 2 African American, 2 without any definition of who they were reaching to. There's now 2 talk stations, and 1 doesn't cover any local things. It's a national right-wing talk station. The only one that covers local news is the station that both of you are on, WURD. Without WURD, there'd be no local talk show. So there'd be no way to know what's going on with SNAP. So clearly we are not getting information the way that we got 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And this clip is an attempt to address that. What do we do? How do we talk to people who aren't watching the television news? I can't blame them, but aren't watching, aren't reading the newspaper. By the way, the newspaper costs $3 a day. $3 a day to buy the newspaper. It's not nothing. Now you can get some of it online for less, but still, it's expensive. The radio doesn't cover it. We're down to 1 radio news show. And so this is an attempt to find a way of using social media to go ahead and tell the story of what SNAP means and how people can make sure that they follow through. The importance is clear. If you get a letter saying your benefits are being cut, you only have 15 days to appeal that letter. If you appeal within 15 days, you continue to get the SNAP benefits until you go ahead and make sure that you get it. But if you don't, they cut you off And at that point, you can reapply, but during that process, you don't get anything. So maybe we can show the video and people can see what's going on, and we'll talk a little bit at the end.
Let me start out by giving a very important quote spoken by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He says these words: "Non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as cooperation is with good." What does that mean? To cooperate with evil is evil. To cooperate with good is good. To not cooperate with evil. And so we're living in a day and a time in which there is a great deal of resources being taken away from everyday Americans and being put into the hands of the one percenters. Let me say to any of you who are victims, any of you who are dealing with this kind of layout in our nation today, in which we pompously quote that we are the richest nation in the world. How is it that resources can be taken away from people who are striving to do the best that they can with what they have, to give to those who can do more? I think that on today it is very important that not just for our SNAP benefits, but for whatever benefits are needed, not only contacting this office, but making sure that we stand with brothers and sisters regardless of race, gender, and culture. Because one thing that I know for sure is that poverty knows no culture. Thank you for this privilege. Thank you for this time, brothers and sisters. And thank you.
All right, so we're here today to announce a contest that we're launching along with our co-sponsors and partners, including Weaver's Way Co-op, Grace Baptist Church of Germantown, the Welcome Church, the PA Policy Center, and the Philadelphia Hall Monitor. The aim of the contest is to spread the word about new work requirements for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, and to encourage Philadelphians who are at risk of losing their benefits to reach out to us for help. To enter the contest, you can produce and post a short-form video on social media and complete our contest entry form for a chance at a $500 cash prize. So far, we've raised enough for 4 monthly prizes over 4 months, with the most effective messaging. Now, the reason this is all happening is that over the summer, Congress passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. One of the big things that this did was extend major tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and corporations, and it paid for it by making massive cuts to SNAP and Medicaid. In other words, they're taking food off people's tables and cutting their health care to give tax cuts to the rich. An estimated 114,000 Pennsylvanians are going to lose their SNAP benefits this year because of the new work requirements and the cuts. Many of them should actually still qualify, but they're going to get their benefits cuts because of lost paperwork, because of missed mail, or because they just don't realize that they qualify for an exemption. And that's why we're really encouraging people to reach out to us by phone or by filling out a form on our website to get help. If you've been denied for SNAP, if you've had your benefits cut, please reach out for help. And if you want to help, enter our contest. It's really easy. Just make a video, post it online, and enter on our website at www.philaup.org.
Yeah, Melinda. I've been bartending for 36 years. Last fall, I lost my job at a catering company, but as we moved into a slow season for the industry. Since then, I've been trying to get back to full-time employment, but it's difficult during the winter. Because of my work history, I've been able to qualify for unemployment benefits to help cover my bills in the meantime. I also applied for SNAP benefits to help with my groceries, but it was denied because I missed the deadline after getting my mail late. But with PUP's help, I'm appealing the denial. I've turned in everything they need and hope to start getting SNAP soon. Getting SNAP would help me out while I'm trying to get back on my feet. Having my groceries covered is one less thing to worry about while I look forward for a new full-time job. I want to tell other people in the same boat, reach out for help. You don't have to do it alone. Call PUP with your appeal and they'll help you fight to get your benefits back.
Important is that the people who are making these decisions just really have to hear from the people that are actually affected by them. A lot of the times they get focused on other priorities, they get focused on tax cuts for the rich, on whatever else they're trying to do, and they forget that what they do actually hurts real people. And so, Jose, I really thank you for speaking out on your own behalf and behalf of everyone else who's been affected by this.
Let's talk about SNAP in Pennsylvania. How big is SNAP in Pennsylvania? Well, the first thing we know is that there are about 2 million, actually more than 2 million Pennsylvanians and Pennsylvania households that are receiving SNAP benefits. That's about 1 in 7 Pennsylvanians, 1 in 7 Pennsylvania families. That is a lot of people. Those folks overwhelmingly, about 50% of them, are seniors, children, and people with disabilities. That's about half of the people, of the 2 million people in Pennsylvania who are receiving SNAP benefits. Those benefits, what are they? It's about $180 a month. I would ask any politician to try to feed themselves or their family on $180 a month. Mm-hmm. Overwhelmingly, these folks are actually working. And households that are receiving SNAP benefits, 4 out of 5 have someone in the household who is working already. Which maybe asks the question, how are people able to work in Pennsylvania and not be able to feed themselves? As a reminder, it's been 20 years since the General Assembly of Pennsylvania raised the minimum wage, and at that time it was only $7.15. Now, when we give these SNAP benefits out, this is a tremendous program. It's one of the most successful programs in combating hunger in America. It has significantly reduced hunger. It is extremely effective. For every $1 that is put into SNAP, it generates about $1.80 in our economy. And that's one of the things, is that we've heard from folks in the religious community calling on this as a moral issue, and it most certainly is a moral issue. It is an ethical issue. It is also an economic issue. And so I think it is worth pointing out that Pennsylvania has $4.2 billion that comes into our state economy through SNAP. When those folks receive their $180 a month in benefits, what are they doing with it? It's not going into a Swiss bank account. It's not going to fancy trips to islands with billionaires. They're spending it in local businesses. There are 10,000 retailers and more who are benefiting from the SNAP benefits that bring business to their places. That's grocery stores, that's farmers markets, that's creative ways that people are getting the food that they need to support their families.
Communities across the country. One thing I wanted to point out also is that in terms of the scale, the amount of money that they're planning to cut from SNAP over the next 10 years, it's $186 billion. That's 20% of the budget for the program. That's 1 in every $5. That's what they want to take away. And that's why it's so important to help get the word out, because this is just absolutely unprecedented. It's never happened before on this.
I'm here as representation from Liberty to speak about a few things, specifically the SNAP benefit and the work requirement changes that are coming. Liberty Resources, we help our consumers transition out of nursing facilities, and a lot of times they don't have income and they need to be on public assistance, and we have to apply for that. So with these different requirements that are coming down, it's going to tie up our transitions for our consumers, because we need to make sure that all of the services that we provide, that are provided through the state, which is home and community-based services, are set up so that the consumer could be successful while living in the community. Now, outside of Liberty Resources, I'm also with another organization called ADAPT, and we go out and we fight for the rights for people with disabilities. And again, one of the cuts, SNAP benefits, is something that ADAPT and other grassroots organizations are talking about now as groups, to see what we're going to do as a group, and to make sure that nobody, regardless of the community they come from, if they need the benefit, to make sure that they stay on the benefits.
Noticed how much religions and people of faith are concerned with the act of eating. Last week, Christians observed Ash Wednesday in the beginning of Lent with the words from Isaiah 58. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to share your bread with the hungry. At the same time that Muslims were entering into another season of fasting, Ramadan, where people often fast and at the same time attend to the needs of their hungry neighbors. Next week, Jewish people will celebrate a story where justice is sought through both fasting and feast, Esther's story of Purim. So how is it, as we've already been reminded, that last night, the State of the Union address included words of celebration of kicking people off of food stamps. We all need to eat. Food is basic to our ability to thrive. And people, all of us, are so tightly interwoven together. If people are going to have trouble getting the food that they need, let's make sure we give them ways to have choices to fight back. Hunger is rising in the United States and around the world, leaving children and family at risk. But hunger is not inevitable. We can still reach out to our senators and representatives and ask them to do the work to strengthen SNAP. If you know someone who needs help with food, make sure to tell them about resources that are available, including any emergency food closets and applying for food stamps. If someone is having trouble with a food stamp application, there are people who can help, like people here at PUP. Together, let's envision a world where all have access to the food they need.
Good morning. My name's Tway Ho, and I am an attorney at Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. And we at CLS are very excited about PUP's SNAP Awareness Video Competition. But before I was an attorney, I was a refugee here in Philadelphia, and a refugee family that relied on SNAP benefits for years while my parents worked. And so I know the importance SNAP benefits are for low-income immigrant communities and low-income communities in Philadelphia. And before we talk about SNAP work requirement changes, I just want to name that the immigrant eligibility changes that came with H.R. 1.2, devastating. Cutting SNAP benefits, where if I came over as a refugee today, I wouldn't be eligible for SNAP benefits. But we're here to talk about SNAP work requirements. We at CLS helps thousands of Philadelphians every year with public benefit denials and terminations, benefits like SSI, Medicaid, TANF, LIHEAP, and pertinent to this competition today, SNAP benefits. Since the passing of H.R. 1 last summer, our team has been working diligently on the community education efforts to ensure all of Philadelphia understands these SNAP changes, these SNAP work requirements. Specifically what the work requirements are, how to comply with the work requirements, what exemption categories exist that allow individuals to not have to meet the work requirements to maintain their SNAP benefits, and how to appeal an adverse benefit determination or termination. Our staff has trained hundreds, if not thousands, of concerned Philadelphians on SNAP work requirements since last summer, but we know we haven't been able to reach everyone who could be affected by these SNAP work requirements. And so that's why we're thrilled about this SNAP Awareness Video Competition, and we're hopeful that this competition will be able to spread the important information and content to reach impacted Philadelphians.
We really need help getting the word out. You know, we have members who do a lot of great outreach around the city. We need to get online. We need to spread the word. If you're a content creator, if you just film the occasional video and pop it up on your socials, make a video, go on our website, enter the contest. You're going to help a lot. You're going to help spread the word. You're going to help let people know that they can fight for their benefits, that they can get help fighting for their benefits, and you might get a chance at a $500 cash prize. So to me, that's a great opportunity to help and to possibly win a prize. So please enter the contest and help us spread the word. Thank you.
I come here to share with you something that's deeply rooted in my faith tradition. Serving God means feeding the hungry. And Jesus makes this very clear in Matthew 25 when he exhorts his followers to feed those who need food. When we do that, it's like we're feeding God. Jesus identified with the least of these siblings, and we are charged to serve them. You don't need to hear a sermon about why it's wrong to keep people hungry, though. I think we all know that well, no matter what our faith tradition is, no matter what our politics are. No one should go hungry, especially in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. So we want to raise awareness about this crucial issue. People can do something to make change and ensure families don't go hungry. It is the only moral It is the only faithful, it is the only decent thing to do. Thank you.
So it's hard to say it any better, and that's the part of the problem. How do we reach people? How do we talk with them? How do we let them know that if you're horrified by what you're seeing, you can actually do something, and when you take action, it reduces the anxiety and the horror.
And I, you know, from the right, you know, you hear all this rhetoric about this being a Christian nation. It's not, but if it were, wouldn't we be feeding each other, you know, and you know, living those ideals in the New Testament? You don't
Well,
hear about that.
The
A
late
lot of
Jimmy
Christians,
Carter said as much.
yeah. What you hear about is the Old Testament, you know, the Ten Commandments and all that. You never hear about the Beatitudes, which is something I still don't understand why the religious right goes that way with it instead of, you know, but who am I?
So let me explain a little bit deeper down to what's happening. The state of Pennsylvania gets money from the federal government. Jeff Garris talked about how much. The state of Pennsylvania is now required to cut people off. But the actual wording of the letter and what the state of Pennsylvania does isn't limited. So, for example, we are asking State Senator Street's office to get the Department of Welfare to send a letter to everyone they cut off. The Department of Welfare knows who they're cutting off. They have the list. Now, I don't think it's appropriate to ask them to give us the list or to give PUP the list or to give anyone the list. That's private information. People have a right to their privacy. But if the state can send the person a letter saying, hey, you have benefits now, and maybe you won't have them later, and all this gobbledygook, after they remove the person from the SNAP program, they could send them a letter saying, we've removed you from the SNAP program. There is help for you to get your benefits turned back on. Call this number. Go to this webpage. Do this. Now, I can't understand why it requires advocates to ask the Department of Welfare to do that.
Excuse me, is anyone among the, like, since Philadelphia is going to be one of the places that's going to be the most affected by this, what is the Pennsylvania delegation? What's the Philadelphia delegation in Harrisburg, knowing that their offices are about to get hit with calls the minute these things are cut? What are they doing? Is anyone, you know, I know you mentioned that a letter's been sent to Senator Street, but what have you heard anything from any of the other members?
So a lot of it is what we're hearing time and time again. People are talking about blaming the Trump administration, which is, again, understandable. And they're spending a lot of time telling the Trump administration or Senator Fetterman or Senator McCormick what they should do. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Senator Fetterman doesn't care what I think. Senator McCormick doesn't care what I think. The question shouldn't be from our Philadelphia delegation what somebody else should do. The question should be, what should they do? What should they have control? It's often like city council, you know, the people give great speeches about things that they have no control over. And they're wonderful speeches. They're brilliant speeches. They're people who should be getting awards for speaking. But when it comes down to things that they actually control, they disappear. It takes Paul Steinke to talk about the importance of the school buildings. City council says they're concerned, but they have complete control over the school budget. They have complete control over these things, but they won't exercise it. They talk about we need to help small businesses. Again, great speeches. Small businesses are important. They're a way for people to escape poverty. They're a way to build intergenerational wealth. There are ways of securing neighborhoods and making life more pleasant for people who are shopping. All those are true, and all those speeches that they give are absolutely brilliant. But then when it came time to do away with the tax break for small businesses, they all went along with the mayor. Not a single one of the council people said, well, if the mayor's going to cave, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to enter the lawsuit and defend the exemption for small businesses. It's so much easier for these elected officials to make speeches and to talk about things somebody else should do than to take any responsibility for figuring out how they can fight for these things. And that, to me, is one of the things that enrages me. You know, the state of Pennsylvania, they give, again, great speeches. The governor gave a great speech, and we're going to hear more about this next week when we talk about the PICO rates. Governor gave a great speech about how unaffordable electric rates are. And somehow he forgot to mention that the electric rates are set by his appointments on the Public Utility Commission, and the Office of Consumer Advocate on a state level has agreed to settle all these cases, which is why the electric bills are so outrageously high. The electric company, which is, we call it PICO, and I understand that, but PICO's owned by Exelon, which is, again, a mammoth corporation. They own a number of utilities. The rate of return for Exelon, their profits are up incredibly. They're making a 13% return. Now, if you're a smart investor in the stock market, maybe you're getting 4.5%. So on a basic necessity of life, electricity, which we all unfortunately needed a fair amount during the cold snaps, because the governor put people on the Public Utility Commission, because the one institution that was supposed to be defending us, the Office of Consumer Advocate, worked together, they gave Exelon a 13% return on their investment. It's just unheard of. And again, it's an example of, it sounds great when you talk about these things. It sounds great to say, I'm concerned and I'm worried but the next step is, what can I do? So hopefully, from my point of view, hopefully State Senator Street, the Philadelphia delegation, State Senator Hughes, some of these people who are saying the right things will go ahead and force the governor's office to send out letters to people who are losing their SNAP benefits and saying to the people, look, we're sorry we cut you off. That's what the federal government requires us to do. But we're not turning our backs on you. We're going to help you appeal this decision. We're going to help you apply again. We're going to help you. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to send you to these organizations, whether it's the Philadelphia Unemployment Project or it's Community Legal Services, or it's somebody else, somewhere to go to put up a fight, because we know from past experience that when people fight, they win. The victory at the president's house is not complete. It's not over. And I'm not suggesting that everything that they fought for, they won. But I am suggesting that without that fight, without people on the street, without Michael Cord, without Dawn Chavous, without those people putting in motion a strategy and fighting both in the courts and out of the courts, there wouldn't have been any victory at all. And so we know that when people get organized, we can win. The problem is that we have a state led by a quote unquote liberal Democrat who is turning its back on the people who are losing SNAP and refusing to reach out and do anything.
All right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for that report. We're going to be staying on top of that. We'd like to thank Paul Steinke for being with us on the show. Next week, Isaiah Thomas will be with us.
And one more pitch.
Yep.
If you have a video about SNAP, send it in. Let's try this. Instead of just bitching and moaning and complaining, let's try and connect with people.
All right. We'll see you next week on Hall Monitor.